Next speaker is Mr. Douglas Corley. He is the founder of DHB Global, and he's also the global panel member of MIT Technology Review. Last year, he participated in person here. He was supposed to be here. His visa was issued, but unfortunately, because of the re-entry issue, he was unable to join us here, but he's coming online right now. And this will be followed by a closing keynote, Joy Wilson, who is especially here from California. And please start the session with Douglas Corley. His topic is Healthcare, Building Sustainable Systems for the Future.
All right. Thank you so much. Firstly, I want to say, Atfar, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you to everyone in attendance, and thank you for everyone online tuning in. I hope next year to see you all in person for the next installment of the Future Summit. Can you hear me okay? How much of a delay is there? Okay. So I would like to start with a story. Roughly this time last year, I was able to visit and make friends, both old and new. And I can honestly say, even though it was my first visit to Pakistan and meeting many of you for the first time, that these are friendships for a lifetime. And for all of you that know me, of course, there was also pizza, quite possibly my favorite food. But unfortunately, the climate we find ourselves in is less lighthearted. Today, we face change and we face challenge, global, economic, as well as questions around trust and governance. And the real question is, how did we get here? Where are we now? And what can we do about it? So from a high level, we arrived where we are today, thankfully, because of globalization. Globalization has done many good things for the world. It has lowered the cost of goods. It has built many businesses around the world. It has built relationships around the world. And there is a very famous saying in the entrepreneurship world, which is, no one ever gets fired for hiring IBM. And I think that, as a metaphor, perfectly encapsulates how we got here within the frame of healthcare. What this really means, this IBM example, is that there's a risk of failure to innovate or to challenge the status quo. And I've been able to listen to a few of the other speakers, and especially around some of the more traditional industries in the world. I would say healthcare is maybe the most averse to change. It's very much stuck in its ways. Within America, for context, there are 2 EHR, electronic health record systems, that make up 90% of the market, and combined they have a worth over $50 billion US. And they're really just not very good systems. And so even though there's been a lot of government push for these things to innovate, you need constant iteration. You need a market that is truly global, where you have a lot of pushing and you have a lot of incumbent technologies. And healthcare has depended for so long on existing solutions. For example, the out-of-box solution. So to use a technology metaphor, the idea of Linux versus Windows. So something that is perfectly tailored to you and to your problem, as opposed to an out-of-box solution. And I think if you look at the traditional development of medicines, I know genomics was just mentioned. The traditional developments of medicines has focused around animal models. And what we have now, one of the reasons why I mentioned genomics is because now we have not just genomics, but metabolomics, proteomics. You have 5 major pillars of omics. And you can really robustly identify which medicines work very well for a Pakistani male, but would not work well, for example, in an American Caucasian male. You can get very precise. Again, the current medicines that we have developed and are using in the world's market today were not developed on these next generation platform technologies. Therefore, they're not nearly as precise as hopefully the solutions in the next 10 years will be. So that's how we got here. Through globalization and the expansion of these very large companies, I think it's really pulled up the average. But where are we now? So at the end of last year, I found myself in Pakistan as well as in many other parts of the world. I think I was in 6 countries in the last 2 months at the end of 2019. And then 2020 started, and we were all of our plans got shifted. COVID hit, and I would say that there are 4 major phases. The first was the emergency phase, and so I believe in many parts of the world we are out of that. To the best of my knowledge, and for my friends on the ground, Pakistan has done an admirable job of tackling some of the initial problems of COVID, and has moved into what I would call phase 2, which is finding solutions. So really trying to identify, phase 1 is how can we fix these problems immediately? Phase 2 is how can we fix these problems in a more sustainable way, in a longer term way? And that really gets into a concrete example would be buying masks or buying gloves or buying any of these healthcare oriented PPE items. Everyone initially was trying to import, whether it's from neighboring countries or from far away. And logistics became cluttered. The cost of logistics became problematic. Customs delays became an issue. And it isn't a sustainable solution. And so, to the best of my knowledge, again, in Pakistan, there has been a good kind of domestic or grassroots solution to try and solve the issues, specifically around things like ventilators and masks. And that was, phase 2, finding a solution. Unfortunately, some of the items, for instance, gloves and single-use masks, if you look at a landfill, you're going to find many, many of these. The last number I saw was that in France, there were numbers calculated. Every week, there are 300 million masks thrown away in France because of the healthcare workers and the high-risk workers who have to use multiple masks every single day. So it's a huge amount of waste that is being created, and we need to find better, more sustainable solutions. So, multiple-use masks, cloth masks, as well as fancier technologies where you have either copper wiring inside of them, or where you can use these for months at a time, or an older solution like silver magnate masks that are able to be used for 3 to 4 months at a time. So where we are right now is trying to find solutions and trying to find more sustainable ones as we approach the vaccine. Hopefully, BioNTech has been working on one that's been quite successful thus far with Pfizer, and I believe the AstraZeneca and the Oxford have also had very promising data this week. I believe 90 and 95% efficacy thus far. It's still early. The next question is where are we going? So I would sum it up this way. For the past 30 years, we have been in a very globalized society. I'm 35 years old, and I can remember when I was a child seeing pictures of, we are the world, and everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya. And the mental image of that really is to illustrate everyone is in this together. And I think that sentiment is very true today. But I think the overall solution of there being a few factories in the world, I don't believe that is a longer sustainable solution. So I dub where we are going as a regional plus approach, and that requires considerable digitization. One very clear example that you may not think about is essential medicines manufacturing. So at my company, we have been approached by a half dozen federal governments that unfortunately, due to supply chain constraints, do not have access to either the medicine itself or the raw material to make the medicines for their 100 most commonly used medicines, both over-the-counter and prescription. And when you start to think about supply chains still being down and still being problematic, that leads to very, very large problems. That leads to imports continuing to be expensive, and that cost being passed along either to the end user directly or indirectly through taxes. And not only that, but we need to be able to have our own solutions. We need to be able to build our own systems. So one of the things that we do is we work with governments to try and identify how best to work with health systems to actually refill these essential medicines. And right now, the world is quickly seeing how innovation can happen in the vaccine world, not just in vaccines as an adjuvant to try and eliminate the issue, but for therapeutics and for diagnostics. So if you can imagine, the typical investment costs 10 years approximately for a therapeutic, and it costs about 1.6 to 2.2 billion US dollars, depending on if you go by WHO numbers or Wellcome Trust numbers. And what we're seeing is it has taken approximately 6 months, and the Sinovac within China is doing their phase 3 in Brazil right now, and I believe before the end of the year they will have their final approval, assuming that their trial goes well. Russia has already approved their vaccine, and that Sinovac that does not yet have global approval. Within the US, it would be EUA for US FDA. They already have approval from the Chinese FDA, so they're already in distribution and in use. And so you can think about, at a systems level, what needs to be more sustainable? We need to have a more sustainable regional manufacturing so that we are more self-reliant and so that we can build better relationships with our neighboring countries, meaning looking very earnestly at what we have in hand and what we are able to build on our own. The next area that I would point to is what can we do at this point? And I would say very obviously, COVID has illustrated the best and the worst of the systems we live within and we take for granted every day. And what that really means is what we can do is try to build trust into our systems. So again, DHB has been working since the beginning of COVID with the World Economic Forum COVID Task Force. As I've already mentioned, I work with MIT Technology Review as well. And so we've assisted 30 plus governments globally. And the core question was, how can we trust the products that you're helping us with? How can we trust the vaccine that you're setting up a clinical trial for? And the word that kept coming up is trust. And so I believe all of us have gotten much more used to being online, whether it's for our children having classes, whether it's for speaking with friends during a quarantine or a lockdown, or it is using e-commerce to mitigate risk. All of us have used a lot more digital tools, and that will be the same for healthcare technology. We will have more digital tools that allow us to do things at our pace. So a few examples, because I think that helps to illustrate. So in America, there's a company that has created what's called digiceuticals, or digital pharmaceuticals. And it's approved by the US government for mental health and for anxiety treatments. And these kinds of applications that kind of feels like a game almost, these are starting to really catch on. And especially, in my line of work, I spend a lot of time looking at the lists of companies that raise funds, companies that are growing, and companies that are solving big issues. And what I'm starting to see more and more is a need for digital tools that can tackle physical problems. And that can come across in many ways, whether it's a platform that helps you to talk with another, maybe it's an algorithm that helps you to better understand your own behavior, your own issues. It may be something that allows you to update your data and help match your specific health profile to better therapeutics. It may be something that helps you track your food intake. All of these things, food intake's a big issue as well. I'm sure that many of you in the audience during COVID have been more sedentary than normal. So being able to track your nutrition or track your exercise and your mobility is very useful. And at more of a systems level, thinking about the health industry, there are many enterprise solutions that have come out over the past 6 months as a response to COVID that are better aimed to tackling some of the supply chain disruptions. And if you think about vaccines, the big issue that's going to come up is that some of these require considerable cold temperature storage or cold storage. And I believe the BioNTech does not. I believe that they're able to be transported at room temperatures. But the majority of vaccines historically require that. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of disruption because of our behavior change. And if you really think about how we use technology, and over the past 5 years, I can find myself using this thing considerably more. And one of the real honest things is it feels less and less like this is an item that is here for me, and more like it is an item that I use because it is something I must. And I think that COVID has allowed us to better identify the use of technology in our lives. It certainly allowed us to find sociability, and hopefully moving forward, it's something that we'll have a better understanding of how to utilize. And with that, I know that today has been a bit delayed, so I want to be a bit short and make sure that Joey, our closing keynote, will have ample time. So with that, I'll give one final point, which is, what does the future vision look like, specifically for Pakistan? Again, I look forward to being there next year. I believe that the healthcare industry can be a major driver for jobs creation locally and capacity building regionally because of the in-hand resources. There are many things that Pakistan has a competitive advantage in. It has a good geographic positioning. It has a very young and upskilled and scaling up workforce. The average age in Pakistan, when I checked, was 21.8 years of age. It's a population of 220 million persons. That's very impressive. I think with the education, again, based on my limited experience, my last trip to Pakistan, I was very impressed, not just with the communication level, but just the logic, the really raw intelligence and drive of many of the people that I met, both that are already in well-positioned jobs, and also the very ambitious, talented persons that I met. So I think both in terms of the more traditional manufacturing, as well as the mixing with the digital tools, I think Pakistan has a very bright future, and I hope that the next year sees a little bit less COVID and a little bit more sunshine. So thank you all very much for the time, and I hope all is well.